Hello and welcome to Talk Story to Me. I'm so happy that you can join me, and today I'm going to get to talk to you about one of the other movies that James and I saw on Saturday, which was I Saw the Light. That was on our date, which was just wonderful. We got to see Zootopia, followed right up by I Saw the Light. Both very different movies, but at the end of the day, very enjoyable movies, though I feel a little bit bad referring to this movie as enjoyable because Hank Williams had such a sad life in many respects. There were so many struggles, there was so much suffering and pain. But what I did enjoy about the movie was the way it was crafted, the style that they offered it in, and a number of other actors. So it still goes under enjoyment, but it's not a sadist in me that's enjoying the movie, I promise. Anyway, before I get into that, I'm just going to hit on my biases so you know whether or not you can trust my opinion. As far as this goes, the primary one is I grew up with a lot of folk music. That was something that my grandparents really enjoyed, and my parents as well. My dad would sing Hey Good Looking to my mom pretty regularly, and that was usually a sign that work had gone very, very well. Thought there was only one verse for the longest time. And then my grandpa Farlow, who you've heard me talk about in particular, he regularly would sing these songs. In fact, I would be out in the studio with him when he was carving the statues or painting or whatever project he had been commissioned for, he would often be playing Bible tapes, and then in the middle of it, he'd break out into these folk songs, including Hank Williams songs. So it makes me very, very nostalgic in a sense. I still miss my grandfather a lot, and this made me think of him, and that may bias me a little bit more in favor of it. The other bias that's relevant to this is the fact that anytime there's a character who's dealing with chronic pain issues, even if that individual is not handling them very well, I empathize very strongly because of my own struggle with chronic pain and many of my friends who have been through the same problems. It is a nightmare, and it's something that tends to get worse with age. There are a lot of people out there, there's really nothing that can reduce that suffering, so I empathize very quickly with those individuals. So, bear those things in mind when you're listening to this review, and let's jump on in. So, I Saw the Light is a biopic focusing on the last 6 years of Hank Williams' life, basically his rise to fame and some pretty incredible accomplishments within a relatively short period of time, which is, I guess, it's focusing more on, I suppose you could say, his downward descent in his physical, mental, and emotional health as his condition worsened, his dependency on alcohol and drugs, the pressure, and so forth. Now, at first when I was watching this movie, I thought that the pacing was a little bit off. In fact, I was a little confused with where it was going because it kept, it felt like it was skipping around and there wasn't a lot of explanation for what was going on. Now, I know a little bit about Hank Williams because I've read about him. You know, he's still a very popular musician in a lot of places, and his influence is still felt in many, many places. And there were so many other indicators that the movie had been made with care, so I was looking for what was the reason with the pacing. Because you see, it's like you'll get a scene and then it moves forward. And sometimes there's dates in the corner to give you more of a time frame, and it's set up in parts as a faux documentary where you have people who helped in his career talking, and that bookends certain sections and provides information that wouldn't be as easy to show. And I think I figured out what they were trying to accomplish with this particular style. Now, I could be wrong, I haven't confirmed this, but this is my theory, that this has been consistently described as being a grounded and more intimate view of Hank Williams's final years. And so it's set up almost as if you're a friend of Hank Williams who stops in from time to time. It's like the story goes along like this and then dips in and then keeps going. And you're a friend who's close enough to see these fairly personal moments, but you're not going to get an explanation. it's assumed that you understand a lot of the basic things about Hank Williams, or that you can identify when it's being shown on the screen. Because the movie doesn't spend a lot of time explaining things or spoon-feeding things. You can figure things out. There are a lot of clues about what's going on, and I think when I get to watch it a second time, other things will come through. And I like that. There are different types of biopics. Some give you everything all the way through, and they really work on it as a good primer for understanding everything about that person. Though I will add, I never take a biopic at complete face value. There's always artistic license and a certain level of inaccuracy, and I think it just needs to be expected that that will be in there. So this one, once I realized that the storyline seemed to be following that, and it's also punctuated at points with home movies. I think they were called Kodachrome, but I'm not positive. It was a little bit before my time. It works very well, and the other thing I think that corroborates my theory that maybe that was what the purpose was, it also connects to the fact that this is a more intimate look. A lot of the shots themselves are a lot of close-ups, and sometimes the shaky cam, when they were panning around, it just struck me as odd and threw me out a little bit. But often the settings themselves are in fairly intimate places. A lot of living rooms, hallways, a few in porches and yards, obviously you get a couple of studios and stages, but nothing too glamour and glitzy. I think there's a couple of really nice places that they go, but for the most part, everything's fairly ordinary. And so I think the other aspect of this movie is it's showing, in many respects, that Hank Williams was an ordinary man who did some pretty extraordinary things. Well, yeah, it's not really going for a glamorized perspective on this, which I think is good. Often, individuals like Hank Williams are people that we revere and we build up to this almost mythic status. And again, because of his accomplishments in such a short period, and particularly as additional things have come out, it's easy to want to raise that pedestal even harder and not recognize certain challenges that those individuals faced. And in this, it seems very clear that his rise to fame did cost him a great deal, and a lot of things worsened for him, from his health to his marriage, though the marriage part, I don't know that anything would have made that work well. That was tumultuous from the beginning, though they did have some sweet moments. And actually, that's a great way to move into the acting. I thought everyone in this did a good job. You know, there were some minor actors who gave performances that were a little bit more stiff, perhaps, but as I was talking to James about it afterward, I'm not sure that there was anything wrong with that. It might, because not everyone's fluid in person. I've met people who are very wooden in real life. And for the most part, the acting talent falls on the shoulders of Elizabeth Olsen and Tom Hiddleston. And I've seen both of them in other pieces. Elizabeth Olsen's been in Godzilla and Age of Ultron and some other pieces. And then Tom Hiddleston, of course, has been in The Hollow Crown, Crimson Peak, Only Lovers Left Alive, and the Marvel movies and Thor movies. So they've had experience, and I thought they both did an excellent job here. And one of my favorite things to do when I watch a movie with an actor or actress that I've seen in other roles is to see whether I can forget who that individual had portrayed before. And I was able to do that here. I had no problem believing either of them and the character that was given, and I thought that was really good. Elizabeth Olsen as Audrey, she is... I felt sympathy for her at several points, and I felt bad for some of the stuff that she went through. But she was also portraying a difficult individual who made things a lot harder, quite frankly. And she did it really well, and it gets that visceral response of, oh my goodness, somebody needs to do something about this character. Though I will say there is a scene in this that if you are watching it, and in case you didn't figure it out, do not handle a drunk man the way that she does. That is a fantastic way to get shot. Oh, that's a good way to get shot. Basically, if you run into a drunk man with a gun, you need to stay calm and do not escalate the situation, even if you're exasperated. And then Tom Hiddleston as Hank Williams, I thought he did a really great job. I know there was controversy about his playing the role, since he's obviously not from the U.S. and not even from the South, well, kind of goes without saying. But he did really well. I would not have guessed that he didn't speak American, I suppose would be the best way to put it, because I've heard a lot of attempts at American accents, and there's a bunch of them. My husband and I often watch BBC, and there are some really bad attempts at American accents. In fact, you don't even have to leave the US to get some bad attempts at certain dialects. And here it was never distracting. I don't know that it was 100% authentic for an Alabama or a Tennessee accent, but it didn't distract me. I thought it worked well and kept me in the story. And he portrayed Hank Williams as a man who was very gifted and yet struggled greatly, particularly with this back pain from the spina bifida occulta. And most of the time where I get a little frustrated with attempts to make stories more grounded or to do the untold story is that they take this great delight in pulling out all of the dirty laundry and completely destroying the individual. And this movie doesn't sugarcoat what Hank Williams did or who he was, but I didn't feel like it was trying to disrespect him. I think it was more trying to show everything that he went through and how he was still, even with that, able to create these very memorable songs. And it goes along with some of the depth of what Hank Williams did accomplish, because one of the things I've noticed is that individuals who are the most interested in sharing their abilities, whether it's through song or service or however it might be, we want to trust those, that the smile is sincere and that the smile isn't hiding any sort of pain, but oftentimes it is, and oftentimes those people who smile the biggest are the people who are hurting the most. It's not something we like to think about, but this movie makes you think about it. So, yeah, it was a great performance. I mean, it definitely got my emotions engaged. I felt very bad for him. He makes it very easy to see what Hank Williams' motivations are in just about every single scene. There were a couple where I was a little bit confused about what was happening, but I think that might have been the point, that even Hank Williams didn't know what he wanted. He was just kind of in a bad mood. And there was the way that the drugs and some of the sexual situations and the alcoholism were handled. All of it seemed to be coming back to the fact that this is an attempt at an escape. You know, the thing with chronic illnesses is that they generally don't lighten up. In fact, they get worse with age. And, you know, I've been very, very fortunate. I have been able to avoid painkillers and a lot of things, but most people aren't. Most people have to start using various painkillers or other forms of substances to try to cope, because just getting up can be hard. And you know, it seemed you could take it a couple ways, but I thought that the way that they were setting it up in this movie was to suggest the reason that Hank Williams missed some of these meetings and such, even though yes, he was drunk, it wasn't because that he got drunk just for the sake of getting drunk. He was intoxicated because he was trying to cope with this pain. And particularly back in the 1940s and 1950s, the understanding of chronic pain and these illnesses where you could essentially, you look fine. You know, he looked a little skinny and red around the eyes, but again, they would probably blame that on the alcoholism and such. When in reality, there is a much deeper cause, and living with that, it is incredibly difficult. And I'm guessing that more than likely that was part of the reason he had such a drive to write his songs and to even perform as much as he did. But what I really enjoyed with this portrayal is that, as hard as you see a lot of these other things, is that as soon as he gets on stage, a lot of that burden lifts and he just thoroughly enjoys it. There's a couple of exceptions which are key to the plot, but for the most part, that was a really nice contrast, because you see how even with this heavy burden, he was still able to get out there and perform, and you know that he was doing it for a reason. So yeah, take that with a grain of salt in case I'm reading more into it than I am. I will say that I did want to see a few things a little bit more. Now, I know, I'm fairly certain that Hank Williams actually couldn't notate or read music. So throughout the movie, like I said, it assumes that you can put the pieces together. So when we see him writing his music, he's just writing in a notebook, and he's writing poems, and he refers to them as poems. He doesn't refer to them as songs most of the time. So those are good clues. But there's that nosy part of me that just wants to know more. I find artists of all kinds, I love hearing about how they work with their process. I love their passion. But this movie really seemed to make it clear that Hank Williams was a little bit private, didn't like talking about where his inspiration came from, which may have been true, I'm not entirely certain. The other point where I felt that it was a little bit too rushed was right at the end. In fact, I really wish for this that they had, it's already a little over 2 hours, I think it's 2 hours and 3 minutes, and, it's a slow burn. And like I said, it takes a little bit for you to get into it because it's set up in a different way, but it's worth it. And I wish that the ending had been a little bit more developed, because you get up to that final scene and you know what's coming. And also, I hope it's not wrong to give a spoiler, but I mean, this is history. It's been out. This was in the news over 50 years ago, so hopefully I'm not spoiling this for you too much. But there's the scene right before you get the news of what happened to him. Now, they don't show Hank Williams' death scene. We saw him writhing in pain a good bit through this movie. You're left with no conclusion but that he really, really suffered. And I understand why they didn't want to do that again, but there was a part of me that wanted more of a transitional scene, particularly because they end for him with the song I Saw the Light, connecting that a little bit more. The one thing that I realized they may be trying to go for is that his death was very sudden and took a lot of people by surprise. I mean, he was only 29. That, even if you account for the fact that people didn't live as long, at that point that's hardly any time at all. And so the suddenness of the death really just startles you as the viewer as well. And I think that might have been what they were going for, to create sort of that shared experience between what was happening in the audience. And, I can respect that. I just wanted a little bit more. So really, all in all, I thought this was a well put together movie. You do have to bear in mind it's not Walk the Line. Don't expect it to be Walk the Line. But remember, Walk the Line had a lot more material to deal with. Real life is very messy, and particularly with something like this, it doesn't necessarily work well in a 3-act structure. And sometimes there are questions that are raised, such as, well, why did they try to stay together so long? And you're dealing with real people, and real people sometimes act in ways that really is stranger than fiction. So, yeah, it seemed like a good period piece, too. I don't know for sure again, but it looked authentic to me. You had a lot of interesting choices, very subtle choices a lot of times with the living areas. You saw the gradual improvement, and again, most of it isn't glamorized. It's really not that luxurious. And I appreciate that. It doesn't make it look like, oh, yes, this is the life that I want. I think, if anything, it makes you question, wow, he did so many incredible things, but was it worth it? James and I actually were talking about that. One of the ways that I cope with my pain is I just throw myself into my work. That's what I do. I use writing to completely forget about it, and it's worked for now. But there are some consequences to that, and so this movie led to our having some interesting discussions on stuff like that, which are not always the most pleasant to have, but still, it's pretty great when a movie can stimulate that kind of discussion. So ultimately, yes, the movie hit home for me on a lot of levels. I enjoyed seeing the craftsmanship that went into it. I think that everyone tried their hardest on it. There are some weaknesses, or maybe places where it just didn't quite hit quite as well. But if you're willing to watch it and to pay attention, and there's a lot of clues. Like, for instance, they're never going to tell you straight up a lot of these aspects. You have to put it together, and in that, I enjoy that. But yeah, you need to go in expecting that. I think I'm going to lose my voice here. But it's a movie I do recommend, and particularly if you enjoy musical, no, that's not the right word, biopics, and if you enjoy movies that make you think a little bit and that require that you think to put them together, I think you'll enjoy it. So this falls onto the I enjoyed it and will definitely watch it again, and definitely with subtitles, because there was some mumbling which was appropriate to the scene but where I couldn't catch what was being said. So what about you? If you haven't seen this yet, then what is your favorite story of a musician or an artist? And if you have seen it, what did you think? I'll talk to you later. I hope you have a wonderful day. Bye.